like that? You like that?
And welcome in to Purple Daily with Mackey and Judd, Declan producing. And gentlemen, week 1 is upon us. You won't be hearing much of that inside US Bank Stadium unless the noise is piped in.
They'll pipe it in.
Yeah,
this won't be loud.
They should be. This is the first time that the Vikings will have had permission to pipe in crowd noise. There's been times in the past where they've maybe
never stopped them
at
the Metrodome.
So, all right, let's start with there's a few things to get to on today's episode here, including Mark Wilf's comments on expectations going forward here for 2020 and beyond. But Judd Zulgad, the 53-man roster came out, and I mean, when the initial roster came out, and they're also like all these teams are finalizing 16-man practice squads instead of 8-man and 10-man practice squads. So there's just a lot more in terms of moving pieces and strategy that goes into this. But the biggest headlines, I think, when the initial 53-man roster came out were they only had 2 safeties. Now, granted, it's 2 of the best safeties in the NFL.
Right, but there's no backup.
But 2 safeties.
Yep.
And 7 wide receivers making the team, which is, I think, usually 5 or 6 is the common number. 7 is a big number for wide receivers. And Tajay Sharp was the veteran that was kind of I don't know if they're going to keep him or not. So what stood out to you when you saw the 53-man roster?
The first thing was the fact that they basically auditioned all these safeties in training camp and didn't like any of them.
Yeah.
They cut them all. They're all gone. The second thing that stood out at the position that you're talking about, but not because he's going to play receiver, was the fact that Dan Chisna, who was undrafted out of Penn State and is a track and field guy, and was at some point in time late in camp moved to, we thought the Vikings announced it was safety. Zim yesterday said it was actually cornerback, and then moved back to receiver, was kept on the roster as a quote unquote special teams guy, which leads me to believe that he is super, super fast and that somebody else got wind about him. And Spielman, who gets incredibly cute at times like this, decided to keep him. And at some point, I think he's probably going to be cut, but the hope by that point is the teams will have set their rosters and that the Vikings can then transfer Chisna from the 53 to the practice squad. That was my second thing. The third thing is, once the practice squad was set on Sunday, I believe of the 15 draft picks that the Vikings had in April, 14 in some way, shape, or form are still with the franchise. The only one who got cut was a 7th-round safety. I think his name was Brian Cole II, and he was cut early in camp, and he's the only one that they didn't bring back. I think 9 of the 15 draft picks made the actual 53-man roster, and the rest, aside from Cole, were signed to the practice squad. So I was curious. 15 is so huge that I thought it might be 2 or 3 that might not make the team entirely and might just be cut and not come back. So those were probably the 3 things that stood out for me, because it wasn't really an active, like, sexy, oh my God, I can't believe they cut this guy type of thing. So those are probably the 3 things that stand out. And at some point in time here, Phil, I got to think that it's either going to be before Sunday or quickly thereafter that they actually are going to sign a safety of some sort to back up the 2 starters.
Yeah. Well, this is just one of those years, too, where if you're an undrafted free agent, it's just the toughest year ever to make a roster. So I think the fact that they just, this was not a great year if you're an undrafted free agent in Vikings camp, like you just didn't have a great chance to make the team because of COVID and because of the lack of OTAs and minicamps, but also because you're competing against 15 rookies that the Vikings would have presumably top priority set on keeping the players that they drafted. And the only splash move that could have happened was the cutting of Riley Reif, and that resolved itself in the middle of last week. So it's actually one of the least sexiest and probably most nondescript 53-man roster cutdown periods in Vikings history. Like, there's almost always something that happens where you're like, wow. The quarterback situation, I've got to think that during a COVID season, you're going to need more than 2 quarterbacks. I mean, if Kirk Cousins goes down, you're going to need more than Sean Mannion. But that's what the practice squad is for, too.
And they like Browning a lot, I guess.
Yep. So they only have 2 quarterbacks on their actual 53. But so did Browning and Stanley both make it to the practice squad?
Yes.
So they have 4 quarterbacks at least in their ecosystem. And Chad Beebe lives to fight another season as a Vikings wide receiver.
They must love that kid, man.
He looks
He's
the part.
been hurt 1,000 times, and he keeps
part.
coming back, so good for him.
He looks like he could just be your stereotypical, reliable white receiver guy on 3rd and 7.
The quarterback one, to me, is intriguing, and here's why. So let's strip away our personal impressions or feelings about Cousins' comments last week, okay? So political, let's put all of that aside, and let's dissect what he said from a football-only standpoint, okay? Basically, his premise, and I'm not passing judgment, to be clear, his premise is, I don't think I'm going to get it, and if I do, God will protect me, and I'll be fine, ultimately.
Or I won't.
Right.
And I'm at peace with that.
And I might die. But ultimately, he's at peace with the direction of if he gets the virus, which we know to be contagious, highly contagious. So all of that being said, here's my concern. If that is your feeling on life, and it's your right to have that feeling, I'm a little bit concerned that you aren't concerned, not about your fellow man, but about yourself. That would have made me take a good long look at my backup QB and say, gentlemen, we have to take a percentage chart here and up Cousins' chances, possible risk here, because he's not concerned. And that means that in certain environments, we have to assume, and I don't know this, but in certain environments, we have to assume that he's going to put himself more at risk potentially.
I see what you're saying.
And I'm saying this from a football standpoint, okay? Just to be very clear before I get a tweet or something. This is not political. But from a football standpoint, in fact, let's say this. I don't give a damn about Kirk Cousins, the human. All I care about is the arm. And if he's if he test positive for COVID, he cannot play. Like, you can't be like, well,
whether he has symptoms or not. Like,
exactly. But he can't, but he's out. He's out for at least a week. It might be 2. I don't know. That being said, Sean Mannion is my backup, and Browning, who has never taken a snap in an actual game behind him, I think I might have been more proactive in looking for a solution that gave me a backup, who I'm not saying I want to play, but I think I'd feel more comfortable than Mannion, because if Mannion plays, guys, I have zero comfort.
Well, you're not going to have comfort if Stanley plays either. Like,
no, hell no.
You're not going to have comfort. Let's face it. There's only like 25 guys in the world that play that position that you'll have comfort with.
Okay, let's say better chances. Comfort's the wrong word. Let's say that if you have to plug that player in, feel that the downgrade wouldn't be as massive as I feel it's going to be going to Mannion, or God forbid, for the Vikings' sake, Browning.
Well, I think what you're talking about is what the Eagles just did, right? The Eagles are paying, so you can, for the first time ever, I think.
Yes, you're correct.
You can put up to 3 veteran players on your 16-man expanded practice squad.
Yes.
And so what they did, they went to 41-year-old Josh McCown, and they said, all right, we don't need you to like fly to Philadelphia or any of that crap. You can just be at home.
Yeah.
We just want access to you if Carson Wentz gets COVID or something.
Yes.
So can you just be on standby for X amount dollars per week and just be on our practice squad, quote unquote. You're not going to have to be at the facility. You're not going to have to really like do anything.
He lives in Texas.
Here's the playbook.
Stay in Texas.
Yep. Keep up to speed on it. So now is 41-year-old Josh McCown at this point in his career going to come in and light it up if Carson Wentz goes down? Probably not. But like, would you feel more comfortable with him playing 3 games or even a game than you would if it's Sean Mannion? And so I do wonder, like, did the Vikings have similar discussions with quarterbacks that could just give you a better chance? Because to what you're saying, and I don't know if I would take it as far as you. I don't think Kirk is going to be like out at Pizza Ranch, you know.
But I don't know that. That's
breathing in the fumes of everyone's like
honey,
sausage breath.
I'm pregnant.
Like,
what's that again?
I had Kirk Cousins mysteriously absent from the Pizza Ranch commercials. Did Pizza Ranch cut their
I
budget?
Think they cut their budget. Yeah, I don't think it's mysterious at all. That poor schlep who finds out his wife's pregnant is cheaper than Kirk.
Dirk Dozens is the new actor.
Who was Kirk's friend?
Kevin
and
Kirk. Just plowing pizza.
And poor
pizza
Kevin. He got fired right? too, and I don't know why he got fired.
So to your point, so I don't think, like, I'm not going to go as far as you. I don't think Kirk is just going to be out like irresponsible. I do think he feels, even though he doesn't have like fear or anxiety about him and COVID,
right?
I think he does feel, and his comments would reflect this too, he does feel a responsibility to his team to stay healthy.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that is accurate. But it is correct to say that in 2020, it is more likely than in any other year that your starting quarterback, whether it's Kirk Cousins or Tom Brady or Russell Wilson, will miss a game or 2 or 3 because of a positive diagnosis on a Saturday night or something.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it is just the chances of you having to play games without your starting quarterback are higher this year than they would be in any other year. So having a backup quarterback, especially if we think the Vikings, I think we just did a segment on Mackey and Judd, our other podcast, Apple, Spotify, scorenorth.com. We all agree the Vikings are the favorites in the NFC North. But we're not sitting here saying they're a 13-3 team necessarily. We all think that this is going to be like a 10-6 type division.
Mm-hmm.
And if all of a sudden you have to take 2 games of Kirk Cousins and replace him with Sean Mannion, now my opinion about 10-6 changes too. So I agree you have to be mindful of these things in 2020.
And teams,
but what do you do?
Well, but teams, and the Vikings certainly qualify here, they love to be smart, right? Like to say, oh, okay, this speedy special teams guy that we have intelligence that the Patriots love him, okay? So we're going to keep him on the 53, and then we're going to jettison him the next week because the Patriots will be set by then and they won't pick him up. So teams love to be cute. What I'm saying is this. The Cousins comments don't make me think that he's going to be purposely stupid. But if I'm smart and I'm thinking this through, I'm thinking to myself, this is a window that I almost appreciate seeing because it does show a certain I'll be fine or I won't be fine if I get this. And so does he wear a mask to church? I don't know. But if you're going to be smart about it, the assumption should be no. Now, here's the second part. And I don't know the answer to this question. And I believe that some teams have instituted this already. What's your quarterback room like? Literally.
I would probably avoid putting those guys in the same room.
That's my point. But if you don't, and Mannion's in that room, now let's say Cousins test positive on a Friday and Mannion test positive on Saturday. And now I'm starting Jake Browning?
Yeah. And again, just to clarify,
I'm trying to think this out.
You and I aren't talking about, oh my God, what if you get a scratchy throat? Can you power through it and live your life? We're not talking about that. We're talking about the way the NFL has set up protocol. If you test positive, you will not be playing.
Correct.
You have to have multiple negative tests, and there's going to be quick turnaround. So if you get a positive test on a Saturday night, and maybe it's a false positive, you should be, but you feel no symptoms, you should be able to get tested maybe Sunday morning. Like you're not going to have like a 3-day turnaround like at the beginning of the Major League Baseball season. But you probably should be doing everything you can to keep quarterbacks as safe as possible away from each other. Because this kind of dovetails into the bigger picture discussion. Let's get into the next part of this discussion here, which is 2020 expectations for the Vikings. All right. Here's an interesting clip from The Athletic, Chad Graff, on Mark Wilf's comments. I'm just going to read a couple paragraphs here for you guys. How patient can you be with results? This is a question to Mark Wilf. How patient can you be when results, while mostly positive, also show that you're not on the precipice of the ultimate goal, which is a Super Bowl? Mm-hmm. And Mark Wilf said, that's a really good question. Congratulations to Chad Graff for getting the good question
points.
Do you
know it's Graff who asked the question, or is it?
The way he framed the article, I think he's
very
trying
savvy.
to say that it was
very
his
savvy
own
of
question.
Graff. I like that.
Yep.
Good work.
So Mark Wilf talked about wanting to avoid being too knee-jerk or too impulsive. He feels it's important to take a step back after the emotional season and let things settle. They were disappointed by the way last season ended in San Francisco, but the Wilfs felt the Vikings gave themselves a chance. Those close to the Wilfs have long said they envision building the Vikings the way the Steelers have built their franchise. They don't want to change coaches often, and they want to consistently be in the playoff mix. Quote from Mark Wilf, "We feel really good about the football organization we have in place, that they can get the job done. As ownership, you balance those things, but you don't want to be knee-jerk and too impulsive. Our goal is to get to the playoffs, achieve sustained success, and keep knocking at the door, and eventually that door will come down." So he's saying, we're not thrilled that we haven't knocked the door down yet. Mm-hmm. We don't want to knee-jerk to that and just fire a coach and fire a general manager for the sake of doing so. And so they basically took a deep breath this offseason, surveyed the big picture, were probably pretty pissed off at the end of the playoff run when they just got smoked by San Francisco. But they looked at the big picture and said, all right, Mike Zimmer, since 2015, has a 50-29-1 record as Vikings coach. Mm-hmm. That's fifth in the NFL from a percentage standpoint. The points differential is a plus 336 for the Vikings since 2015. Also fifth in the NFL. And the Vikings defense is second in the NFL in least points allowed over that stretch. So they've looked at big picture and said, we think that this collection can win a Super Bowl. So what should the expectations be in 2020?
Well, I think the expectations realistically with what this team is building are for 2021. But 2020 is going to be weird. It's unpredictable. But if I was to take a step back and almost remove the pandemic now, I think that this team really gears up for 21 very well. But Mark Wilf's comments are reflective of how the Wilfs have been since the day they bought this team. I still, back when Ziggy talked more, I still recall him saying the exact same thing. And this is, Phil, this is like 2005 or 6 or 7, talking about the fact that their goal at that time was exactly this, and that is stability. That is to have stability in your stadium, which they do now, where you practice, which they do now, and in your team. Now, the question becomes, does that stability lead to the ultimate championship? And the faith has to be yes. I don't know that it necessarily does for sure. But I will give the Wolves credit for this, right or wrong. And I think it's more right. The approach has never changed one bit. Now, I believe that the team that they looked at when they bought the Vikings as being stability was the Giants, because that's the team that they both grew up as fans of, going to games, going back to Ziggy's time, going to Yankee Stadium to watch the Giants play. But this was the goal. And I think that they see the fact that they have it here. Like this, to its credit, franchise is really stable now. It's really consistently good.
Yes.
It's ultimately, it doesn't get the championship, but it wins divisions. It consistently goes to the playoffs. It's not embarrassing, which is a big factor, because for a long time, the question was not if, it was when the Vikings were going to embarrass ownership, the coach, blah, blah, blah. So you can agree or disagree with approach here. And the last part, too, that the Wilfs do is when they hire their football people to run their team, they basically say, okay. Like I don't think they try, and they're fans, but I don't think they try and run the team. I don't think that they tell Spielman who to go get at quarterback. I don't think that they look at Zim and say, you do know that you've got no experience at cornerback, right, Mike? I don't think that they do that. So they allow the people that they hired to run their team as football fans. They allowed those people to run the team, and their one goal from the day that they bought this franchise was to have the franchise consistently be where it's at. And that's playoff berths. That's division titles sprinkled in for sure. And it would be nice to win a championship. But I got to think, if you gave them truth serum and said, in the 15 years that you guys have owned this team, are you happy with the overall results? I think they would probably say, yeah, we envision being good consistently, and they are. The
Steelers comparison I should say the Steelers aspiration is really the word that we should use, is a really good one. You know, the Steelers, I think you could probably say they are the model NFL franchise over the 50 years that they've been relevant. If you go back to like 1970.
Yep. Chuck Noll.
In fact, I just looked this up. All right.
Mm-hmm.
The Steelers. So I consider a train wreck season to be 5 wins or fewer. If you're like 5-11 or 4-12, that's a train wreck season. The Vikings don't have many of those. Maybe like once every 10 years, the Vikings will train wreck, and then they'll switch a coach out, and then they'll try again. They had one at the end of the Leslie Frazier run. They had one at the end of the Brad Childress run. And Mike Tice never really had one. They had one at the end of the Denny Green run. But there's really only like a handful of train wreck seasons you can point to in the last 40 years or so. The Steelers have had one since 1970.
When was it?
They finished 5-11 in 1988. And that's it. And that's also the time where they were on the verge. I think it took another couple years for them to make the switch to Bill Cowher from Chuck Noll.
92, yes, you're correct.
But the Steelers have only literally only had 3 head coaches since 1968.
Mm-hmm.
So the Vikings, in that they're consistently good, in that they are flirting with championships every decade or so, are probably like diet Pittsburgh Steelers. You know, that's kind of what they are right now. Until they break through and win a championship, they are basically Pittsburgh Steelers light. And there are a lot of franchises that would aspire to not only be what Pittsburgh has become, but that would aspire to be what the Vikings have right now. So when we look at this thing, and I'll give you what I think their expectations should be, but when we look at the Vikings, sometimes it's really easy to get caught up in, we want a Super Bowl now, and anything less than a Super Bowl, A, is not acceptable, and B, should lead to people getting fired. Well, if you're too knee-jerk and you're too quick to pull the trigger on, you just have to know what's behind door number 2, because that's what I've said all along about Mike Zimmer. Yes, Super Bowl should be the goal. And yes, Mike Zimmer needs to be like held accountable and forced to adapt offensively and in the way that he communicates with players. He's done a lot of those things. He's hired smart people. I don't think he should just be fired if the Vikings don't get to the NFC Championship game this year. And a lot of Vikings fans, I can sense, kind of feel that way. Well, I mean, if you go 10-6 and you lose in the first round, then he should be fired.
Sure. Yeah.
It's more complicated than that to me. I don't think the expectation for 2020 is Super Bowl. I think it's win your division, and I think it's win 10 or 11 games and win a playoff game. If those things don't happen, I'm not auto firing Mike Zimmer and like eating the rest of his contract. But I need to see, like, what does it all look like? What do some of the draft picks look like that Rick Spielman brought in? And what does the Gary Kubiak offense look like in 2020 compared to some of the better teams in the NFC? Things like that. There's more context than this is the expectation, and if you don't meet it, you are fired.
I agree. And to go back, they are really well run. And that's important. Like we've seen this team have success in periods where it felt like a gong show. Guys were getting arrested. Guys were doing stupid things. It didn't make sense. It's like, just stop it. And with Zim, especially since he came in 2014 or so, there has been a stability here, and he's done a very nice job. And I actually think his tenure will end. You'll sort of know. It's going to be a shelf life thing. Like if you think players have totally checked out, that changes the dynamic. But to your point, so I would say this. I would say, since the Wills bought this team before, I think it was in May 2005, I would say the worst thing that they ever did as far as on the field was actually, I believe it was 2011 that they won 3 games, correct? That was the year to win 1 game. Like, seriously. And they can't control that. I totally get that. But those extra, so they beat the Cardinals, they beat the Panthers in Carolina and Washington on Christmas Eve. And the Cardinals win, unavoidable. They won that game by a ton. But if you go back and you look at Carolina, and I believe it was Graham Gano missed a field goal attempt that would have won that game for them. And Washington, Ponder got hurt. I think Webb came in and won it. But, and I know that he had injury problems, but if you go back and look, the opportunity to draft Luck that year, that next April, that next spring, that looked like such a great opportunity.
Quick side street conversation. Do the Vikings win a Super Bowl between 2012 and 2018 with Andrew Luck?
I think they probably do. I also think he's still playing now. Like the Colts, if we think that the Vikings have been reckless with their offensive line, you guys, look what the Colts did. Like, they didn't care. It was incredible. I think the Vikings win a Super Bowl or 2 with Luck, and I think he is still playing right now. And I think he's in the prime of a great career. And that would have been your Rodgers or your Favre.
Yeah, I think 2000, since we're down this street, 2017, I think, would have been Andrew Luck.
Can you imagine that?
He's like healthier than he would have been in Indianapolis.
Woo!
He's probably, I don't think he's laying down in that Philadelphia game. Hell, you might have even been hosting that game.
But I mean,
with 14 wins.
That's the year that everything converged. You sucked. You were awful. There was that QB, because that guy's there once every, 10 years, 8 years? There was that guy there, and you had an opportunity to be gloriously bad to get gloriously good.
Yep.
But
so,
what are you gonna do?
Okay, Dex, what are your expectations, 2020?
I think when I look at it, I would say 10-6 is probably should be a realistic expectation. I think most everything is now set, and your defense is improved with Ngakoue. The Vikings' offensive weapons, although you lost Stephon Diggs, I still think with the additions of Justin Jefferson and 2 tight end sets, it's going to be a by committee that basically replaces what Stephon Diggs was able to do. And I just look at, if I'm looking at like the Vikings offense, I think it's what they were able to do last season is still repeatable. I don't see like regression, at least a whole lot of it coming from the Vikings offense. Whereas the Packers, I don't know what Aaron Rodgers is going to do. And you can't just hand off the ball to Aaron Jones every single play. And with Devontae Adams being only their realistic option, I do see regression because I think teams are going to figure them out a little bit more. The defense, yes, although there's some holes at cornerback and there's some question marks in depth at safety after your 2 elite safeties, I still think Mike Zimmer is a good enough coach that he can scheme something up in his pot of stew that can make it a top 10 defense. And the NFC too, although the Seahawks are still very good and we expect the Dallas Cowboys to take a step up, I still think it's really up for grabs. I don't look at, like, in the AFC, I think it's still the Chiefs. Like, you're going to have to beat the Chiefs or even the Baltimore Ravens to succeed them. In the NFC, you basically have 5 teams that can legitimately go to the Super Bowl, and I consider the Vikings one of those 5 teams.
I think there's a huge, like, all right, since you brought up sort of it's the entry point into the tiers of the NFC here. I think San Francisco is on they represent the top level. I think New Orleans is on that top level, and especially if Drew Brees still has gas in the tank. I think those 2 teams are for sure on a top level. Tampa Bay is a major wild card, and that they're a playoff team. They could also be a top level team with all those weapons in Tom Brady. Mm-hmm. But I for sure put New Orleans, and I know that the Vikings beat New Orleans. Like, I get that, but New Orleans is next level, especially now that they've smoothed things out with Alvin Kamara. Like, that's an unbelievable team.
You mean paid a running back?
Yeah, well, we'll see if the Vikings follow suit. Yeah. I don't think we can put the Vikings on the top tier of NFC teams. And then there's other teams like Dallas, that Dallas should take a big step forward. Green Bay could take a step backward and still be 11-5.
And the West is, I have no clue. That could be absolutely stacked. Yeah, Cardinals could get really good.
Yeah, I mean, Seattle, anytime Seattle has Russell Wilson healthy for 16 games too, like, that's maybe a 10 or 11 win team as well.
San Francisco kicked the Vikings' butt in that playoff game, and that's what impressed me. I don't know if I'm as sold on the Saints being in that tier as you are. Like, I think they're good, but the Vikings, that didn't feel like a complete fluke win. The Vikings played them really even, I thought. Sure. So I'm hard pressed. I think San Francisco should be good, very good potentially. I think Dallas should take a step up. But to Declan's point, I don't know how many teams in the conference that I can clearly say I think would beat the Vikings soundly. San Francisco scares me because they just kick their butts, like, physically. But beyond that, I don't know. And I guess my question is, in such a QB-driven league, how quickly do those corners develop to? Because if the Vikings corners develop quickly, which they could, I guess, that's going to make a huge difference and be a game changer. If they don't, it could get dicey because there's enough good quarterbacks out there to pick those guys apart potentially.
Yeah. So it's I think the exercise for the NFC is you almost have to start the other way and say, all right, how many teams are you pretty darn sure are irrelevant?
Give me those.
And it's a short list. I know I'll concede to you that Detroit, like, I don't think Detroit's like 2-14 bad because Matt Stafford's a good quarterback.
I agree with that.
But I don't think Detroit's a playoff team. I don't think Washington's a playoff team, but I also feel like Washington could be playing free and easy this season now that they've gotten rid of their old nickname.
But is Haskins a good quarterback? I don't know about that
Washington's not a playoff team, so we'll give you those 2.
Okay.
I don't think the Giants are a playoff team. It also wouldn't shock me if they did sneak in as the 7 seed.
They could potentially sniff around it.
But I think that's their ceiling.
Yeah, I agree.
But they're not a pushover. If we're counting how many,
like, who's bad? I think Washington might be bad.
There's like 2 in the entire NFC. People might say Carolina. I don't know. Teddy Bridgewater.
I would not assume
winning quarterback everywhere.
I would not assume that with Carolina. I would not assume that.
People might say Atlanta. I don't know. They got 2 stud receivers and a, I would say Hall of Fame quarterback.
He's not a bad quarterback. Nope, I agree.
So you're not looking at Atlanta on your schedule and being like, that's a win. I don't know. Atlanta's a tough out.
Who potentially scares you then? San Francisco does for me.
San Francisco scares me. New Orleans scares me. Seattle scares me.
Yeah.
Philadelphia is going to be good, but they don't scare me. Dallas scares me this year, especially motivated Dak.
Mm-hmm.
And Tampa Bay scares me just because of all the weapons they have. There's 5 teams that legitimately scare me in terms of there could be a gap if the Vikings don't get their stuff together.
I'll go with 4 of those teams. I don't think Tampa Bay scares me because I don't know. Like, I think the coach is good.
I mean, Tampa Bay went 8-8 with Jameis Winston throwing 30 picks last year.
Right, but I don't know that they scare me.
Mhm.
I'm talking about teams that if I'm the Vikings and I look at my schedule and that team is on my schedule, I say, well, this is going to be huge trouble.
Technically, they went 7-9. I guess I was wrong, but still.
But they don't. I'm not saying that they're not going to be good. I'm saying that I wouldn't put them on the they scare me list. The they scare me list in this conference is small. I have a weird feeling that Dallas is going to be really damn good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would say San Fran's the only one that truly, truly scares me. There's other teams I think the Vikings match up extremely well with Dallas and Seattle and teams like that. But I don't look at a lot of these teams in the NFC and say, wow, the Vikings are leaps and bounds behind these teams. I think it's just San Francisco. And even if San Francisco like regresses a little bit, their system is still similar to the Vikings. That's why I still see like consistency there. Like the way they operate their offense, I still think can work really well for them. Even if there is a slight regression to them, I still think top to bottom, they are a better football team than the Vikings. But Drew Brees and the Saints, I don't know. I don't think they scare me as much as they used to even 2 years ago.
It's also worth noting we have not even mentioned a team that played in the Super Bowl 2 years ago and has a plus 300 point differential the last 3 years. The Los Angeles Rams. We literally just dismissed the Los Angeles Rams.
Goff.
It's because of Goff.
I have trouble with Goff.
But the Rams have weapons.
I know
Rams
they do.
Have
but that's my point. That division could be frightening, man. The Cardinals could really pop up. The Rams, the Niners, to your point, Phil, the Seahawks. But the Rams, in my mind, are being universally dismissed by people at this point because nobody knows what to make of the quarterback.
You get,
they like the coach.
The one thing I'm overly simplifying this, but the Steelers are this type of franchise. When a team seemingly train wrecks, and still finishes like 8-8 or 9-7, that's something to watch out for.
I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying that the unknown in that quarterback, I think, creates a lot of questions.
Like the Rams was like, the Rams were kind of a train wreck last year. Yeah, well, the Rams went 9-7.
Yep.
And scored 400 points on offense with question marks all over the place. So, all right. So there's a million things to get to the rest of the week. And now that we're going to have actual football to be played, we're pumped up. And we're going to welcome Corona Seltzer as the newest Purple Daily sponsor, starting with week 1 this season. Declan
might be drinking
happy
already.
About this.
Yeah, already.
Dex might have already.
Starbucks? I don't think there's Starbucks in here.
The Starbucks. Alert the bosses.
So I did some research and development on some lime Corona seltzers this weekend, and
they
do check out for sure.
I got a question. Is this the first time on this show that if a Corona seltzer pops up during the show, the bosses can't say much?
I think they would be happy
because it's the endorsement and we are appreciative. So I think that tomorrow Declan should be sporting a Corona seltzer in his hand.
I think the bosses would be happy.
Yeah, I'll instead I won't hide it in the coffee cup. I'll just have the can out right here. It'll be great.
You should put it right in front of you.
You've got my permission for sure. I mean, don't drink 9 of them and crush them on your head and pass out. Just make sure you can produce the show.
Well, are you kidding? In the Vikings game, that might happen. Yeah.
The potential downloads if Dex passes out.
Also, we should mention too, Ventline is coming back, but it's going to be different than in seasons past. So it's been a caller-driven show for like 6 or 7 years that Judd and I have been a part of. Well, it's going to transition to a YouTube and video-centric show in 2020. And so you'll be able to find Vikings Ventline as part of the Score North and Purple Daily umbrella, and more information on that later on this week as well. So, gentlemen, expectations for the Vikings on this episode, and more to come on the Vikings front the rest of the week. Phil Mackey, Judd Zulgad, Declan Goff, thanks for hanging out with us on Purple Daily.